welcome to Daily Debrief from People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya and today we talk about the deepening crisis in Sri Lanka, Elon Musk giving up on trying to buy Twitter, and the continuing story on the political crisis in the UK. Protesters stormed the official residence of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, president of crisis-struck Sri Lanka, on Saturday. Reports say the president had left his residence on Friday. Footage shows protesters clashing with police in the financial and political capital, Colombo, leaving dozens injured. Protests have pounded Sri Lanka since March as the government fails to find a way out for people struggling for fuel, food and medicines, even at skyrocketing prices. There are popular demands for Rajapaksa's resignation. We'll talk to Prashant from People's Dispatch about the situation. So Prashant, what's the situation like right now in Sri Lanka?
Right, Pragya, this is one of the stories where by the time we're recording right now, by the time the show comes out, things might have drastically changed. So we need to keep that in mind. But what's really happening is, this is outburst of social anger, of public anger that we're seeing, and that has really, gone to a situation where the government really has no longer much control over really what's happening on the ground. So we know that protesters went up to the presidential residence. They entered the presidential residence. We've all seen images of some of them in the pool, for that matter. This is actually highly symbolic because it's a moment where the authority that the government had exercised now seems to be in question. And this is not, this comes out of a real sense of anguish, real sense of anger at the complete lack of any solutions that the government has given over the past many months. We know that this crisis has been going on at least since March and even before. And throughout this time, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa, for instance, has not really been able to provide any sense of direction. There is this massive sense of drift. The economic conditions are really worsening. A new government came to power. Even that has not been able to do anything. So Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was actually a subject of all this anger for many, many months now, and the protesters clearly see him as the number one symbol of all the problems that is rocking the country right now. So we've had previous instances. We know that just a few months ago there were attacks on their ancestral home of the Rajapaksas. We know that memorials dedicated to their parents, for instance, were burned down. Ruling party MPs at residences were attacked, and this marks a qualitatively new step in the extent to which these protests have been taking place. And we need to remember, of course, that these protests are taking place despite attempts by the government to stop it. They imposed what was called a police curfew. And then there was this united uproar against it. Opposition parties, of course, protested. The Human Rights Council protested. The Bar Council also, I think, raised objections. And the government was forced to withdraw it. Again, it shows the difference in the balance of power, where such consistent opposition forces the withdrawal of the curfew. And we know that, for instance, despite there being very little transportation, much of public transport is now effectively not working, a lot of it at least. We know that despite that, protesters were able to come through trains, opposition parties mobilizing as much of their cadre and supporters as possible. So we have a situation of complete collapse of the president fled the house and is now under the protection of the Navy. And latest reports said that even a lot of the government officials were a bit uncertain. They were like, we're waiting for further instructions, etc., etc. And we also have the situation of a few members of parliament of the ruling party themselves calling for the resignation of the president, which means that they've also sort of sensed that this is how the tide is turning, this is how the wind is blowing, so to speak, and they feel that this is now a good time for them to make that demand considering their future political careers. So keeping all this in mind, it's too early to say whether Rajapaksa will continue to be the president, whether he will resign, whether he'll say, I'll resign soon. Multiple possibilities are there, but this is definitely a huge blow to the credibility and the legitimacy of the presidency and the president at this point.
Right. Prashant, now this didn't all start happening only in March. Can you just give us an idea of what preceded the events of March?
Right. So there are a series of steps we need to consider. We talked about this before also, the ban on fertilizers, which caused the agrarian crisis. There was a huge tax cut that was imposed in 2019, which really depleted the government coffers. At that point, everyone was celebrating it. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic had an impact on money coming in. But what has been happening, especially over the past few months, is an appalling decline in living standards for most people of Sri Lanka, which means there's been a massive amount of inflation. And I think about a fourth, or more than a fourth of the population is facing various kinds of food insecurity. We know that the value of the Sri Lankan currency has collapsed drastically, which means the amount it takes to sort of buy stuff is increased, and there's a huge shortage. If you read the reports, people spending days almost in front of fuel pumps in order to get even basic fuel, or for that matter, stuff like, say, milk powder is completely off the shelves. So many appalling reports of people. Sri Lanka is an island, but there's no fish because the boats are not able to go out into the sea because there's no diesel. Right, meat has become extraordinarily expensive. Only the very rich can right now afford it. So all across the board, there is a crisis of food, there is a crisis of fuel and transport, there is a crisis in education. Universities were shut down, I believe, some days ago. The classes went online because they could not, afford to. There was no money for that. And I think recently Sri Lanka Bank declared bankruptcy also, which all of which complicates the negotiations with the IMF, which means that these negotiations are going on, which means that the IMF is now likely to impose even stricter conditions on Sri Lanka. There's no end to this crisis in sight. And amid all this, I think what is really angered people is that the government has resorted to repression, it has resorted to defaming the protesters, it has failed to come up with any kind of constructive agenda. And the Prime Minister is Ranil Wickremesinghe, who himself is the only member of parliament of his party. So he himself is seen as some kind of a political player, someone who has struck a deal with the Rajapaksas, so to speak. And there is no real respect for him, although he keeps making these announcements. He was brought to power saying that he had clout with the international community. But nothing really has changed ever since he came to power as well. So I think these protests have been, it's sheer frustration, sheer anger. Of course, Sri Lanka also a relatively small country, which makes it easier for this kind of mobilization to take place. And we know that many such economic crises are taking place in many parts of the world. So this confluence of global factors, of very poor economic decisions by the government, a kind of repression that was unleashed against the protesters, the kind of comments that were made by ruling party leaders, all this, as I think, has reached a boiling point where people are, people are just saying that we can't take this anymore. And there are even reports of some military personnel joining the protests as well, which is always a clear sign that the regime is in its last days or is in dire peril. So, like I said, in the next few hours, the next few days, very, very crucial for Sri Lanka. Who knows, by the time we come back for the next episode on Monday, what's going to happen.
Right, Prashant, thanks. Very perilous situation it looks like. And we'll be back with you in just another minute or two. The Elon Musk Twitter deal was supposed to be the biggest buyout ever, but on Friday, the Tesla chief has called it off. Musk said that the $44 billion deal is off because Twitter could not share details of spam bots versus real users of the social media platform. The Twitter board of directors has not taken kindly to the cancellation. It may insist on the sale, and a legal battle is in the offing. Twitter stock took a beating soon after the announcement. We spoke to Bappa Sinha about the deal and its sudden collapse. Okay, hi Bappa, welcome again to our show. So, just curious, Elon Musk has been saying that Twitter did not reveal the correct data about its spam bots. Is that the reason why this deal fell through, or are there other reasons?
Right. So Elon Musk's reason look suspicious because Elon Musk was very well aware of the problem of the spam bots in Twitter. Right. In fact, when he made the bid in the first place, he had said that one of the reasons he was doing that was that he was going to take over the platform and clean it of these very spam bots, right? So, and Twitter has always said that around 5% of their activity is spam activity by these spam bots. Elon Musk has pulled up a figure of 20% without substantiating it, right? So that it looks more like an excuse for him to pull out of the deal, right? The real reason for pulling out of the deal, I think, is that the markets have fallen quite a lot since he initially made the offer, right? In April, the beginning of April. And I think the NASDAQ is down by about 20% since then. His own company, Tesla stock, is down 30% since then. And many of the big market cap stocks like Facebook and Apple, they've all taken a hit. And so he probably feels that that he can negotiate the price down, right? Or he can get a better deal. At that time, when the offer was made, there were a lot of people saying that he was getting it for cheap, and Twitter had initially not agreed to that deal, right? But now, under the changed market conditions, he just may be having second thoughts about that.
What are the options now for Twitter, for the board? What can they do?
So what the board has said is that they're going to sue him, right? They're going to
Right.
take him to court. So now there are different provisions in the deal. So what the board is saying is that, so one provision is that if he for some reason is unable to secure the financing, then there is a $1 billion penalty.
Right.
But the board is saying that they are not going to, they are not shooting for the $1 billion breakup fee. They want to force him to give the entire $44 billion, which the deal was for, right? And they think that they're in very fairly solid grounds for getting that money. Now, typically when such conflicts go to court, they are settled. There is typically a negotiated settlement, right? Like there are some parties which would redo the deal at a slightly lesser price, or there would be a private settlement where one of the party gives the other party some substantial payoff. So, but we will see what happens in this case. See, Twitter, if the deal doesn't go through, and if Twitter is not able to get a substantial amount of money from Musk, then Twitter is in a bad position, right? Because when initially the deal was made, Twitter had, if you remember, Twitter board at that time had not wanted the deal, right? It was a hostile takeover. It was a hostile takeover bid because they said that they could do better. Like on their own, they could do better, right? They said all the things about that they will make Twitter into a great platform and all. After that, they made an about turn and said, no, we are fine with the deal. And so once you do that, the market perception for Twitter changes, right? So the market perception for Twitter now is that this is the best that Twitter could have got. Now, then if this doesn't go through, then Twitter is in a really bad position because now Twitter will have to completely reinvent itself and present a plan which the market will have to buy so that they are valued at higher valuation than they are now, because the Twitter stock price has fallen quite a lot because the market has been anticipating that there are problems in the deal. So it has pretty much gone back to the original price when Musk initially started buying Twitter stock. So yeah, Twitter is in a bad shape, and so kind of their only way out of this is to go to court and see if they can get a good deal from the courts.
I guess that's also the price you pay when you have someone like Elon Musk who makes a big fanfare out of every announcement.
Yeah, Elon Musk is fairly unreliable in this sense, right? Because if you remember in 2018, he had publicly announced that he is going to take Tesla private. And then he had backtracked from it. And the SEC, the US regulatory, the Securities Regulatory Board in US, they had not looked at that kindly, and they had fined Musk, and then as a part of a settlement, Musk had to give up the chairmanship of Tesla. So Musk has a history of doing this, and so yeah.
All right, Bappa, thanks very much for that very detailed report on what could happen. Thanks. Outgoing UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's exit has sparked a debate on whether there will be a meaningful change in the country's politics. The UK is experiencing a 40-year high in inflation and cost of living crisis. Rishi Sunak, Chancellor of the Exchequer, among the first to resign from the Johnson government, has pitched for the top post. A slew of resignations followed defeats in two key by-elections in June. They are seen to reflect the wide discontent with conservative policies. A successor could emerge at the party conference in October. But it is not just Johnson who is unpopular. Other leaders have been found committing various infractions in the last few months. We'll return to Prashant. Yeah, welcome back, Prashant. So, is this a Boris Johnson problem that the UK is facing, or is it something bigger than that?
No, absolutely, it's not a Boris Johnson problem. So in the days aftermath, after his resignation, there's been a lot of candidates have come up with Rishi Sunak, the former chancellor, has announced his campaign called Ready for Rishi, and we've been hearing all kinds of negotiations going on in the Conservative Party. Some people hoping that a new government will be in by August. Some people hoping that it might even happen even faster. But what is very clear is that the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is united when it comes to policy. prescriptions. Let's have no doubt about that, in the
Right.
sense that none of the new candidates who are appearing as prime ministerial candidates have anything different to offer except more austerity policies, more cuts in spending, more repression against activists. We know some appalling policies were passed during Boris Johnson's period which targeted anybody who dared to dissent. And all of this is something all these candidates completely agree on. So this is not really, I mean, Boris Johnson phase, was personally a very, let's call it, problematic person, for lack of a better word. There was always scandals running around him, and it's true throughout his career. But the fact is, what the government he presided over, and the kind of line the Conservative Party has taken is nothing really. It's not that he himself led this party to this position of water. This is a position that the entire party has pretty much taken. There's not going to be any change at all as far as when a new government comes in. So the problems that the United Kingdom is facing right now, the economic crisis, the problems caused due to Brexit, the problems caused due to its own foreign policy as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, none of these are really Boris Johnson exclusive problems. And Boris Johnson's personality might be very closely associated with some of these issues. But all of these come from policy decisions that the party has made in unison. There's no real disagreement. I mean, if you look at some of the claims that people are making, some of the campaign slogans that people have come up with, nobody really has any. The argument really is we need to package ourselves better as a party.
Right.
At the most, that's about it. It's not, oh, we need to stop the drift. We need to sort of connect to our voters better. But it's not really that, we need to sit back and think are our policies working or not. That's not something anybody's saying. That's not really even on the card. So this is clearly, this is a problem way beyond Boris Johnson. And I don't think any new government is going to change anything at all when it comes to that. In fact, some of the candidates have even more drastic proposals which will make things much worse. So that's where we are at now. So not too much hope as far as the mainstream political parties are concerned. For that matter, even Labour's policy differences are quite minuscule.
Right. So Prashant, not just changing a face. Prashant, is there any hope or talk about a alternative to what is currently on offer?
Right. So it's important to note, I mean, for instance, Morning Star is a great article by its editor Ben Chako, for instance, which addresses exactly this issue. And this is something many on the left, many from trade unions, many from the more progressive sections are talking about, that this government change is essentially meaningless. What we need is a more radical agenda on the picture. And a hope from that comes from the fact that this has been a time of great trade union resurgence in some senses. There's been an increase in the number of people who are willing to protest, who are raising their voices. We saw the RMT strike, the railway workers strike recently. National Health Service workers have been extremely unhappy with what's happening. Teachers, doctors. So across the board, there's been an increased massive amount of dissatisfaction that working people in the United Kingdom are expressing, and that also provides some sense of hope. Now, the real question is, how do you sort of channelize that into creating effective policy prescriptions, into making effective interventions in the government? Now, that's a big bridge that the left and the progressive sections in the UK really have to figure out how to cross, because the traditional vehicle for a lot of these aspects of the Labour Party, but now the Labour Party itself has been de-radicalized to a considerable extent. Right. Like we talked about before, Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters completely sidelined. We have a leadership which does not even want to encourage strikes or support strikes in any sense of the term, although the workers are really struggling. So we have a Labour Party which has also moved very close to the Conservatives in terms of policy prescriptions, and it is in fact, I believe the Conservative Home Health Secretary who resigned, Sajid Javid, said that Boris Johnson's great victory was defeating Jeremy Corbyn. And that is very much the case, in the sense that with Jeremy Corbyn's defeat in the last election, what happened was that now Labour and Conservative have now moved together and become integral parts of the establishment once again. So the call for this new vision, a different vision of society, is very much there. Like I said, it will be a big challenge for these sections to figure out how to effectively present it to the British public as a kind of platform, as a kind of position on which people can unite and make effective change. That's the biggest challenge for them. But I don't think there is too much hope that either of these two parties is going to effect that kind of change or take that forward. In fact, I think there is going to be a period of, in the coming, as a new government comes to power, they'll probably try to push more of these policies which the earlier Conservative governments have pushed. And so there will be the trade union sections, the working class, for instance, there will be a period of fresh protests or fresh, pushback from these sections against these policies.
Right, Prashant. So a period of great turmoil.
Right, absolutely.
And that's all we have for today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Please come back to us on Monday and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And for more updates and analysis from around the world, visit peoplesdispatch.org.